July 12, 1947. A room in New Delhi. The temperature is 108 degrees Fahrenheit. A British lawyer in a woolen suit sits sweating over maps he cannot read. His name is Cyril Radcliffe. He has never been to India before. He has 5 weeks to split 400 million people into 2 nations. We are told this story is about freedom and independence. We are told it is about religion and politics. That is the fairy tale. The truth is simpler and darker. This was not a partition. It was a liquidation sale. Britain was bankrupt. India was not freed. It was foreclosed. Let us go back to 1945. The British Empire still paints the map red. From Cairo to Calcutta, the Union Jack flies over a quarter of the human race. London is the financial capital of the world. The pound sterling is the reserve currency. British banks finance the railways of Argentina, the mines of South Africa, the tea gardens of Ceylon. To the casual observer, Britain is still the empire on which the sun never sets. Parliament still commands fleets. The king still sits on a throne built from the plunder of continents. India alone is worth billions in today's money. It is the jewel in the crown. It supplies cotton, jute, opium, tea, and most importantly, manpower. 2.5 million Indian soldiers fought for Britain in World War II. They bled in North Africa, Italy, Burma. They held the line when the Nazis were at the gates. But beneath the surface the foundation was rotting. The Second World War did not make Britain a victor. It made Britain a debtor. The cost of fighting Hitler was $350 billion in today's terms. Britain had sold off its foreign investments to buy American guns. It had taken massive loans from the United States under the Lend-Lease program. By 1945, Britain owed America over $30 billion. The interest alone was crippling. The British Treasury was running on fumes. Rationing was stricter after the war than during it. Bread was rationed for the first time in British history. Coal was running out. Factories were closing. The British public was exhausted and angry. They voted out Winston Churchill and brought in the Labour Party under Clement Attlee. Attlee's government looked at the balance sheet and saw red ink everywhere. The empire was no longer an asset. It was a liability. India was the biggest liability of all. The colony that had once generated profit was now bleeding money. The cost of maintaining the Raj was astronomical. The British Indian Army alone cost millions of pounds a year. The civil administration was a sprawling bureaucracy of judges, tax collectors, and policemen. The railways were crumbling. The irrigation systems needed repair. The famine of 1943 in Bengal had killed 3 million people and destroyed what little legitimacy the British had left. Worse, India was becoming ungovernable. The Quit India movement had turned violent. Strikes paralyzed the ports. Soldiers were mutinying in the Royal Indian Navy. The Muslim League was demanding a separate homeland for Muslims. The Indian National Congress was demanding full independence. London had no appetite for another colonial war. The British were tired. They wanted out. But they could not just leave. If they simply packed up and went home, India would explode into civil war. The Hindu-Muslim tensions were already boiling. The British needed an exit strategy that would allow them to wash their hands of the mess. They needed to divide India so that the blame for the bloodshed would fall on the locals, not on London. This is where the economic trap was set. Britain's strategy was not peace. It was plausible deniability. They would draw a line, create 2 nations, and leave before the violence started. That way, they could claim they had given India freedom. The blood would not be on British hands. It would be on Indian hands. But the British had a problem. Who would draw the line? If they chose an Indian politician, the other side would scream bias. If they chose a British administrator who had lived in India for years, he would have friends and enemies and interests. The British needed someone ignorant, someone who had no connections, no history, no knowledge of the land. Ignorance, they believed, was the same as impartiality. So they went shopping in the legal profession. They found Cyril Radcliffe. He was a brilliant barrister. He had never handled a colonial dispute. He had never traveled east of Paris. He knew nothing about irrigation canals or religious shrines or the demographics of the Punjab. He was perfect. Radcliffe was offered the job in late June of 1947. He was told he would have a few months to study the issue. He thought it was manageable. He accepted out of patriotic duty. He flew to Delhi on July 8th. When he landed, Lord Louis Mountbatten, the last Viceroy of India, met him with news. The timeline had changed. Independence was now set for August 15th. Radcliffe had 36 days to complete the work. He was horrified. He told Mountbatten it was impossible. Mountbatten told him delay was not an option. The violence was already starting. If they did not act immediately, millions would die. Radcliffe was trapped. He could not refuse. He was the only man standing between India and chaos, or so he was told. Let that sink in. 36 days to divide a subcontinent. Radcliffe was installed in a bungalow on the Viceroy's estate. He was given a team of 4 judges. 2 were Muslims who wanted Pakistan. 2 were Hindus who wanted India. They were supposed to advise him. In reality, they canceled each other out. Every meeting was a shouting match. Radcliffe stopped inviting them. He locked himself in his room with the maps. The maps were the problem. Some were from the 1920s. They showed rivers and roads and towns, but they did not show people. India is not a static place. In 20 years, villages had moved. Canals had been dug. Populations had shifted. The maps did not show that a Hindu landlord owned a canal used by Muslim farmers. They did not show that a Sikh shrine was next to a Muslim graveyard. To Radcliffe, these complexities were invisible. He saw topography, not humanity. He saw a river and thought it was a natural border. He did not know the river changed course every monsoon. He drew his pencil along the lines, unaware he was cutting through living communities. The pressure was not just professional. It was psychological. Radcliffe knew that whatever line he drew, he would be hated by millions. He stopped going out. He ate alone. He worked 16 hours a day staring at paper until his eyes blurred. The heat was relentless. He was losing weight. He wrote letters home saying the heat was killing all energy. He wrote that he was working against time and that people would suffer because of his work. He was not a cruel man. He was a bureaucrat handed a gun and told to shoot into a crowd in the dark. The specific problems were agonizing. Look at the Punjab. It was the breadbasket of India. The population was mixed. Muslims, Hindus, Sikhs. The Sikhs were the hardest problem. They had no country. Their holy city was Amritsar. Their lands were scattered across the Punjab. No matter where Radcliffe drew the line, the Sikhs would be cut in half. He received Sikh delegations who wept and threatened and pleaded. Radcliffe listened, but he could not draw a circle around scattered shrines. He had to draw a straight line. He gave Lahore to Pakistan and Amritsar to India. It looked neat on the map. On the ground, it meant a Sikh farmer 10 miles west of Amritsar was suddenly a foreigner in his own home. Then there was Bengal in the east. Calcutta was the industrial hub. It had jute mills, factories, a massive port. The countryside was largely Muslim. The Muslim League demanded Calcutta for Pakistan. Without the port, East Pakistan would be an economic corpse. The Congress argued Calcutta was a Hindu city. Radcliffe had to decide. If he gave Calcutta to Pakistan, the Hindus would riot. If he gave it to India, East Pakistan would be destitute. He gave Calcutta to India. That decision doomed East Pakistan to decades of poverty. But in that moment, he was just balancing a ledger. As August 15th approached, the work became manic. Radcliffe was deciding the fate of millions in minutes. He looked at a district called Gurdaspur. It had a slight Muslim majority. By the rules, it should go to Pakistan, but it controlled the road to Kashmir. If he gave it to Pakistan, India would be cut off from Kashmir. He paused. He thought about the strategic implications. In a moment of hesitation or calculation, he gave Gurdaspur to India. That one flick of the pencil led to wars still being fought today. By August 12th, the work was done. Radcliffe gathered his papers. He had created 2 zigzag lines stretching thousands of miles. He presented his award to Mountbatten. He expected the map would be published immediately. He expected the British Army would be deployed to keep the peace. But here the story turns from incompetence to betrayal. Mountbatten looked at the maps and saw outrage. He saw that the Sikhs would be furious. He saw that Muslims would feel cheated. He looked at the calendar. Independence Day was August 15th. Mountbatten wanted the celebrations to be happy. He wanted flags and fireworks and bands. He did not want riots to ruin the day of glory, so he made a decision that is unforgivable. He took the maps and locked them in his safe. He decided not to publish the border until August 17th, 2 days after independence. He wanted the British to be technically gone before the bad news was announced. He wanted to wash his hands of the chaos. On August 15th, 1947, millions of people woke up in confusion. They were free. The British flag was lowered. The Indian and Pakistani flags were raised. There were speeches and fireworks. But in the borderlands, nobody knew which country they were in. The police did not know whose laws to enforce. The soldiers did not know which generals to obey. Rumors began to fly. A rumor would spread that a village had been given to Pakistan, and the Hindus would panic. Then a counter-rumor would say they were in India, and the Muslims would panic. The uncertainty created a vacuum of fear. Into that vacuum stepped the men of violence. Local militias and gangs had been preparing. They saw the confusion as an opportunity. They began to tell their people that the only way to be safe was to cleanse the land of the other. If you did not know where the border was, you made your own border with a sword. Radcliffe stayed in Delhi for the independence ceremonies. He watched the joy from a distance. He knew the secret locked in the safe. He knew the cheers would soon turn to screams. He felt like a criminal. He packed his suitcase. He prepared to leave. He did not wait for the announcement. He did not wait to see the results of his work. He wanted to get as far from India as possible. But even as he headed for the airport, the first trains were leaving. The first fires were burning. The Great Migration was beginning, and the man who caused it was fleeing the scene of the crime. On August 17th, the maps were released. The radio announcements were made. The newspapers printed the jagged lines. The suspense was broken, but it was replaced by a reality more terrifying than any rumor. Across the Punjab, millions realized they were on the wrong side. Imagine the moment. A farmer who had lived on his land for 40 years suddenly found out his farm was in a foreign country, a country defined by a religion he did not belong to. Sikh farmers in West Punjab realized they were now in Pakistan. Muslim artisans in Delhi realized they were now in India. The logic of partition was that these people should move. But moving meant abandoning everything. It meant leaving the cows, the harvest, the house, the graves. At first, there was denial. People thought it was a mistake. They thought the line would be adjusted. But the violence was not disorganized. It was systematic. In the Punjab, militias had been stockpiling weapons. When the line was announced, the cleansing began. The message was simple: leave or die. In the villages, drums would beat at night. Mobs would surround a settlement. They would set fire to the perimeter to trap the inhabitants. This was not a war between armies. It was a war between neighbors. People who had attended each other's weddings turned on each other with a ferocity that shocked even World War II veterans. Radcliffe's line had cut the transport networks in half. The railways were lifelines, but now they became arteries of death. Refugees flooded the stations. They climbed onto roofs. They hung off the sides. The trains were packed so tight that people died of suffocation before the whistle blew. But the real horror happened on the tracks. As a train filled with Hindu refugees left Pakistan and crossed into India, it would be ambushed. The tracks would be sabotaged. The train would stop in a field. Men with swords would board. They would move systematically from compartment to compartment. When the train pulled into the station, the doors would open, and silence would pour out. These became known as ghost trains. Sometimes the driver was the only one left alive. This happened in both directions. A train of slaughtered Muslims arriving in Lahore. A train of slaughtered Hindus arriving in Amritsar. The railway lines Radcliffe had seen as black ink on a map had become rivers of blood. The roads collapsed first. Then people began to walk. They formed vast columns called kafilas, some stretching 50 miles, long snakes of humanity, disappearing into the dust. Hundreds of thousands moved barefoot under a merciless sun. Children rode on shoulders. Possessions were piled on heads. There was no food, no water. The elderly collapsed and were left where they fell. Mothers faced impossible choices: abandon their babies or lie down and die with them. These columns were not safe. Cavalry charged into crowds, sabers swinging. Women were abducted by the thousands, turned into weapons of humiliation. By the end, 15 million people crossed the new border, the largest migration in human history, compressed into a matter of months. And where was the British Empire as this apocalypse unfolded? It was still there. 50,000 British troops remained in India. The Punjab boundary force existed. But the orders from London and Mountbatten were clear: save the British. Protect imperial personnel. Do not intervene. There are accounts of British regiments sitting in barracks while nearby villages were slaughtered, listening to the screams and doing nothing. The officer class that had claimed to uphold law and order for 2 centuries stood aside as the law burned. They packed their cricket bats and silverware while the country dissolved around them. Cyril Radcliffe was already back in London when the full scale of the disaster emerged. From a flat in Mayfair, he opened the newspapers and saw the photographs' refugee columns under circling vultures, cholera ripping through camps, rivers choked with bodies. The death toll climbed 200,000, 500,000, then finally settled near 2 million. 2 million lives lost because of a line drawn in 36 days. Radcliffe was shattered. He told friends he could not sleep. He understood that every hesitation of his pencil had become a death sentence. A canal cut meant a village without water. A road divided meant an escape route erased. The British government offered him his fee, £3,000. Radcliffe refused it, saying he could not accept payment for so much suffering. It was an act of conscience, but it changed nothing. He never returned to India. He feared what awaited him there. "I suspect they would shoot me if I went back," he later admitted. He lived on but never escaped the map he drew. The Radcliffe Line did not end in 1947. It created Kashmir. It enabled war. It armed 2 nations with nuclear weapons. A border meant to bring peace became a permanent wound. But beyond geopolitics lies the human legacy. Partition is the founding trauma of modern South Asia. Almost every family in Punjab or Bengal has a story: a grandfather who remembers the walk, a grandmother who remembers the sister who never arrived. Culture itself was severed. Urdu's greatest poets ended up in Pakistan while their readers remained in India. Punjabi singers found their audiences split by barbed wire. The line was arbitrary, but it became absolute. Today, that border is one of the most militarized on Earth, visible from space as a burning line of floodlights. It follows the exact path of Cyril Radcliffe's pencil. A line drawn by a man who knew nothing is now guarded by nuclear weapons. Was this incompetence or something darker? Some historians argue Britain left chaos deliberately, believing a divided subcontinent would be easier to manage and useful as a Cold War buffer. These are cynical theories, but the facts are undeniable: a 36-day deadline, an ignorant draftsman, and a refusal to deploy troops to stop the killing. At best, it was criminal negligence. At worst, calculated destruction. India and Pakistan have since spent trillions preparing for wars that never end. The violence of 1947 stopped, but the anger did not. The line remains, hastily drawn, eternally paid for in blood.